If you're in charge, we're out. That's what he said, with a smirk so wide I could see the half-chewed gum between his molars. The same manager who used to salute my mother with fake loyalty now stood in my office, my mother's office, arms crossed, 30 resignation letters fanned out like a poker hand.
My name is Imani.
And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Because have you ever been handed the keys to your mother's empire, only to realize every man in the building thought you were the janitor? Let me tell you what happened. My mother died on a Monday. Heart failure. Sudden. No warnings. No time to prepare. She was the founder and president of Harper & Light, a boutique financial firm that started in our garage and became a powerhouse over 2 decades. She built it with fire in her lungs and ice in her spine. And everyone feared her. But they didn't respect her because she was tough. They respected her because she never gave them an inch to disrespect her. Her death shattered me. But grief wasn't allowed to breathe, not in a family like mine. Because by Tuesday, the board was already voting. And by Wednesday morning, I was sitting in the leather chair she'd bled for. They didn't even warm at first. Her right-hand manager, Ethan Watts, looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's just interim, Imani. You'll be out once the board finds someone with experience." Experience? I had a double MBA. I'd been shadowing my mother since I was 16. I was the one who fixed her spreadsheets when her CTO couldn't. I knew this company's bones. But none of that mattered. Because I wasn't just the new president. I was the daughter. And worse? A young woman of color in a boardroom full of legacy hires with fragile egos and gold-rimmed glasses. So, when I walked in that Thursday morning, black dress still stiff with funeral starch, and found 30 resignation letters on my desk, I didn't even flinch. Ethan was leaning against the wall, sipping coffee like it was champagne. "I warned them," he said. "But they don't believe in this hand-me-down monarchy. No offense." I looked at the letters. Names I recognized. Men and women my mother had promoted, trained, paid tuition for. People whose children I'd babysat at company picnics.
Gone.
Because of me. I looked at Ethan. He smiled like he'd already won. So I said it. Just one word. Perfect. That's when the smirk slipped. He blinked. "Sorry." I stood up, my mother's ring on my finger, still loose but heavy. I said perfect. I repeated. "Now I know exactly who the dead weight is." He laughed. Nervously. "You can't seriously think." "Oh, I do," I said. "But thank you. You just saved me 6 months of internal audits." Then I picked up the phone. "Lisa? HR, pull up Ethan Watts' contract. And prepare severance packages for the rest. No negotiations. They've made their choice." Ethan's coffee cup hit the desk hard. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice hard now. I met his eyes. "No," I said. "You made the mistake. When you assumed I needed you." And I watched, with all the grief and fury of a daughter denied time to mourn, as the color drained from his face. Because in that moment he finally realized this wasn't his building anymore. It was mine. They never thought I was serious. Even when I walked through those doors as acting president, even when the legal notice was pinned with my name on every internal bulletin, Imani Harper, president and CEO, they smiled like I was a prop in a bad reality show. To them, I was the grieving daughter, a placeholder, a soft body filling the chair until a real leader arrived. They didn't know I'd been preparing for this for half my life. My mother knew the wolves she was surrounded by. She'd whisper to me after dinner, reviewing notes and board projections while the office lights still burned behind her eyelids. "You have to learn everything, Imani, not just the numbers. Learn the lies people tell with handshakes." She trained me in silence. I sat through meetings where I was just observing but clocked every passive-aggressive power play and every deal that came with strings. I knew when someone gave praise with their teeth clenched. I knew when an of course really meant never. And Ethan? He had always been the worst of them. He loved to talk about loyalty, but was the first to leak inside updates to the press when a competitor sniffed around. He once made a joke at a corporate retreat. If Imani ran the firm, we'd all be meditating in a circle. Everyone laughed. Even my mom, briefly. But I remembered.
And now?
He was in my building, fuming over a reality he couldn't control. See, my mother didn't just give me access, she gave me power. And not the surface kind. I had internal access codes. I had budgetary control over discretionary funds. I had a list of every mid-level manager who secretly despised Ethan, but had stayed silent out of fear. Now they were emailing me quietly. If you're staying, I'd like to stay. I never liked the culture Ethan built. Count me in. Do we finally have a chance to rebuild? 30 walked out, but 60 stayed. And more were creeping back. Because in corporate war, loyalty isn't about heart. It's about survival. And people could sense the winds changing. Ethan must have known too, because he began sabotaging me from the shadows. Sudden IT issues. Reports going missing. Departments failing to meet deadlines after months of flawless work. He was trying to make me look incompetent. But what he didn't know was, I had eyes on him. My assistant, Marla, sharp, intuitive, loyal like a sister, started tracking his meetings, his coffee chats, even his printer logs. We found things. Side invoices. Emails to recruiters. Mentions of setting up something new with a few old faces. He wasn't just waiting for me to fail. He was building a backup plan in case I didn't. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about leadership. This was about legacy. They didn't want a woman like me in charge because it challenged their illusion of control. And the more I stood still, the more they mistook my calm for weakness.
So I gave them time.
To feel comfortable. To get sloppy. And while they whispered behind glass doors, I sharpened my knives in silence. Because they thought my mother's death was the end of a chapter. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of mine. And I was about to show them exactly who they'd underestimated. The first real crack showed in a boardroom meeting 2 weeks later. Ethan was still showing up like nothing had happened, walking around with that crooked tie and tired jokes, pretending the company was still his playground. But that day, as we discussed Q3 projections, I asked a simple question. Why did Client Portfolio 7B lose $2.1 million in leverage assets when we haven't executed any options against it? The room went silent. Ethan blinked. What? I leaned forward. You heard me. The asset file from the trading desk shows losses that weren't reported in last week's operations brief. I cross-checked it last night. He looked at the head of finance, who refused to meet his eyes. One of the newer board members shifted uncomfortably. Ethan cleared his throat. That must be a clerical error. I don't think it was, I interrupted. In fact, I think someone moved funds and tried to reallocate them through a dormant partner fund, which hasn't been touched since 2020. Now they were all sitting up. I flipped a page in my folder and slid copies across the table. Here's the record. Here's the metadata. And here's the IP address used to make the transfer. Ethan didn't speak. He just stared at the paper. Shall we continue? I said, my voice calm, cold, and louder than his silence. That night, Marla came into my office after hours and closed the door.
There's more, she said.
I think Ethan's been leaking reports to LexioR. LexioR, our biggest competitor. My stomach twisted. You sure? I asked. She nodded, then dropped a flash drive on my desk. He used a burner email to send PDF exports of our internal projections. The timestamps matched the days he stayed late. I stared at that drive for a long time. He hadn't just disrespected me. He'd betrayed the company. Betrayed my mother. This wasn't corporate games anymore. This was war. I opened my mother's drawer. The one everyone thought I had emptied after she passed. Inside was a single red envelope, marked in her handwriting. Use this only when you're sure. I opened it. Inside was a document that stunned me. Power of attorney with executive override privileges, signed, witnessed, and dated just 2 weeks before her death. She'd known. She'd known they'd try to take me down. And she'd armed me for the storm. By the next morning, I had our legal team working quietly behind the scenes. I froze 3 suspicious accounts, filed a confidential inquiry with the board's ethics committee, and instructed HR to begin preparing contracts for replacements. But the final piece? That came from Ethan's own assistant, Melanie, who walked into my office, closed the door, and said, "I've been waiting years for someone like you. He's worse than you know." She gave me the passwords to his backup server. Emails, documents, even audio recordings. He'd been bragging about crashing the Harper ship from the inside. I stood there, breath caught, vision swimming. But my voice? Steady. "Thank you," I said. "You've just made this easier." Because now, I wasn't suspicious anymore. I knew. And what they'd taken for quiet compliance was the silence of a storm gathering just off the shore. I didn't fire Ethan immediately. No, that would have been too clean, too expected, too generous. Instead, I let him breathe in a room slowly filling with smoke. Over the next 2 weeks, I played the role they all assumed I was born for. The naive, overwhelmed daughter just trying to hold onto her dead mother's crown. I smiled in meetings. I nodded while Ethan explained back to me the very data I'd pulled together. I watched as he strutted through the halls, whispering to his remaining loyalists like a middle school clique king. And all the while I was working, my legal team discreetly built a breach of fiduciary duty file, updated daily. I began rewriting internal policy structures, locking down finance workflows, and quietly creating new reporting systems that flowed directly through my office. No approvals went through unless my signature was on it. No bonuses. No promotions. No department reorgs. I even hired an outside audit firm under the guise of a routine compliance refresh. Ethan thought I was floundering. He didn't realize I was loading the gun, one bullet at a time. The staff who had stayed loyal, I met with them one-on-one. Not as their boss, but as their peer. I asked what they needed, what they feared, what they hoped this place could become again. One woman, Jada, broke down in tears and whispered, "We used to believe in this place before they turned it into a boys' club." I didn't make promises. I made a plan. Each day, another Ethan ally left, not because I forced them, but because they saw what was coming. They realized the tide had shifted, and the new current had no patience for cowards. Meanwhile, Marla dug deeper. One night, she texted me a single word: jackpot. It was a spreadsheet Ethan had hidden in a side folder, disguised as an invoice log. But it was actually a list of outside investors he was approaching, trying to poach them from us and secure funding for his new firm. Confidential NDAs, private lunch meetings, even a pre-drafted resignation speech. He was ready to walk the moment he found someone foolish enough to follow him. And I'd had enough. I prepared my final board presentation. Titled it, "The Rot Beneath the Floorboards." Inside were 37 pages of evidence. Financial tampering, data leaks, audio of Ethan mocking clients, and one final slide: projected recovery plan post-termination of Ethan Watts. At the end of the file was a quote from my mother: "Some leaders shine in sunlight, but the ones who endure learn how to command in the dark." That Friday morning, I sent it to every board member. No warning, no commentary, just the truth. And when I walked into the building that day, hair pulled back, suit crisp, heels sharp as resolve, I didn't feel nervous. I felt ready. I passed Ethan in the hallway. He smirked like always and said, "Big meeting today?" I smiled. "Yeah, it's going to be career-changing." He chuckled and walked away. He had no idea he'd just laughed at his own obituary. The boardroom that morning was unusually full. Every seat taken. Suits freshly pressed. Tablets open. Not a single phone in sight. Ethan strolled in late, like always. A coffee in one hand, his swagger in the other. He nodded at the board chair, grinned at me like we were co-stars in some sitcom. "Apologies," he said. "Had to take a call from LexioR's VP this morning. They're apparently poaching more of our clients." He winked. "Can't win 'em all, right?" I didn't even blink. The board chair cleared his throat. "Miss Harper, you asked for this session. We're listening." I stood. Calm. Steady. Not a tremble in my hand as I clicked the first slide. "Today," I said, "I'm here to report a breach. A slow, calculated, and deeply intentional sabotage of this firm, from the inside." Ethan's grin faded, just a little. Slide after slide, I laid it out. The asset manipulation. The confidential reports leaked to Lexi. The misuse of discretionary budgets. The burner accounts. And then the audio. I tapped the speaker icon and let Ethan's voice fill the room. Let them sink. I've already got backup offers. Harper and Light's been bloated for years. Once that kid screws it up enough, I'll pick the bones clean. The silence after that played like a symphony. Ethan stood, red rising to his neck. This is taken out of context. You can't possibly think.
Click.
Next slide. Melanie's signed affidavit. Then, Marla's report. The investor list. Then, the spreadsheet, side by side with our client registry. He lunged toward the screen. You've been spying?
On me?
This is illegal. I raised a brow. I'm the president. It's called oversight. The board chair cleared his throat. Mr. Watts, please sit down. But he didn't. He looked around the room for support. The same room that once laughed at his jokes, backed his manipulations. Not one hand moved. Not one eye met his. He was alone. The chair spoke again, voice low and firm. Based on the evidence presented, the board moves to terminate Ethan Watts for breach of conduct, attempted corporate theft, and sabotage. Ethan laughed once, bitter and panicked. You're all making a mistake. She's just a girl with a grudge. Then I spoke.
No, Ethan.
I'm a woman with receipts. He stormed out, his exit loud, angry, desperate. Security followed him to his office. They'd already disabled his access badge. Outside, I heard him scream something about lawyers and lawsuits. Inside, I sat down. Not in my mother's shadow, but in my own light. The board chair looked at me, expression unreadable. You understand what you've just done, right? He said. I nodded. I do. I protected this firm. And now I plan to rebuild it. Slowly, one by one, the board members nodded. And then someone started clapping. It wasn't loud. Not at first. But it spread. Like the quiet approval of people who'd just realized who the real leader was. By the time it ended, I felt something crack open in my chest. Not pride. Not relief. But power. The kind that doesn't come from titles or chairs. The kind that comes from standing in the fire and not flinching. Ethan was gone, but his rot had left stains. The aftermath wasn't glamorous. There were whispers in the media, angry client calls, 2 minor lawsuits from former allies claiming wrongful dismissal. The finance team found $1.3 million in misallocated funds that had to be accounted for and explained fast. I worked 14-hour days. I barely slept. But I didn't break. Because finally, the masks were off. And I saw clearly who was with me and who had been waiting for me to fail. 2 mid-level execs tried to block the new restructuring policies I implemented. They failed. Another tried to quietly resign and poach 2 top clients. I beat him to it and offered those clients better terms, locking them into a long-term vision plan I had spent months refining. Lexi's CEO even reached out, trying to offer me a seat at the table. I replied with a single line. I don't sit at tables I had to burn to escape. Behind the scenes, Marla and I rebuilt the leadership team, not with familiar names, but with people who had been overlooked, the quiet analysts who worked late, the interns who noticed cracks before they became crevices, the assistants who held the walls up when everyone else was watching them fall. And slowly, Harper and Light began to breathe again. Then came the final blow, not from me, but from the truth Ethan had buried. The audit firm I hired submitted their final report. Buried deep inside a 52-page dossier was a single note. Multiple forged approvals and fund diversions dating back 18 months, potentially implicating a cover-up involving Ethan Watts and 2 former board members. I brought it to the board without hesitation. 2 days later, those members resigned. And that's when the firm shifted. Not just in leadership. In culture. People no longer whispered. They spoke openly. The break room, once a cold space filled with cautious nods, now buzzed with laughter. I instituted mental health days. Transparent salaries. New mentorship tracks for young women and minority hires. Every change was a brick laid in a new foundation. But even as I built, I felt the pressure. Grief doesn't vanish just because you're winning. I missed my mother in the quiet moments, when the office was dark and the city lights flickered against the window, and I was the only one left in a building she'd carved from sweat and stone. Sometimes I imagined her in the reflection, smirking like she used to, saying nothing, but proud. That image kept me going when the numbers didn't bounce fast enough, when the market dipped, when doubt crept in, because what we were building wasn't for applause. It was for survival. Ethan's name was removed from all internal systems. His shadow faded, but the lesson stayed. You don't just take power, you protect it, and not from others. From the ghosts of doubt that whisper in your ear when everything's burning. But I had walked through fire, and I had stayed standing. So when the final quarter numbers came in and we posted our highest revenue in 5 years, I didn't celebrate with champagne. I just stood by the office window, watching the city blink beneath me, and whispered, "You were right, Mom. Some leaders shine in sunlight." But I learned to command in the dark. The office felt different now. The heavy silence that once stripped down the halls like old paint had been peeled away, layer by layer, replaced with something warmer, more alive. We weren't just surviving, we were evolving. People held the door open again. They smiled without fear of what it might cost. Even the janitor, Mr. Reed, who'd worked there since I was a child, stopped me in the hallway one evening. "Your mother'd be proud," he said, "but she wouldn't be surprised." That stayed with me. In those months after Ethan's fallout, I didn't become someone new. I became the version of me I had buried for years. The strategist, the visionary, the woman who had been ready, but was never welcomed.
Until now.
I didn't just repair what Ethan had tried to destroy, I redesigned it. I launched the Harper Fellowship, a fully funded leadership incubator for young women from underserved communities who wanted to enter finance, tech, or executive management. Applicants poured in. I went on podcasts, panels, interviews, but never to gloat, only to remind the world that power can be worn differently. It doesn't have to be cold or arrogant or bruising. It can be quiet, focused, unshakable, and that terrified some people. I started receiving offers, 6-figure book deals, speaking circuits, equity positions at massive conglomerates. People who wouldn't have looked me in the eye a year ago now wanted me to advise their boards. But I wasn't hungry for validation. I was too full of purpose.
And peace.
On the anniversary of my mother's death, I held a private dedication in the garden she once loved behind our old office. No press. No photographers. Just staff, friends, and former clients who owed her more than they could ever repay. I spoke briefly. I said, "She didn't just teach me how to lead. She taught me how to listen. To the walls, to the whispers, to the wounds left by silence." Afterward, I walked back alone to my car. The same one my cousins used to mock me for, a vintage 1996 cherry red convertible that I'd restored myself in her memory. And as I sat behind the wheel, someone knocked on the window. It was Melanie. She smiled. "You forgot something." It was a package, wrapped in navy paper with a white ribbon. Inside was a note. To the woman who reminded us what legacy really means. "Thank you for bringing us back to life." I looked up, eyes stinging. The skyline glittered like 1,000 quiet promises. Not for revenge, but for restoration. We had lost a matriarch, but we had not lost the vision. We had not lost the fight. And every step I took was no longer a step out of her shadow. It was a step with her. Because I didn't just inherit a company. I inherited the fire. And now I burned with it not to destroy, but to build. 6 months later, I got a letter. Not an email. Not a DM. A real letter. On cheap white paper. Folded badly, shoved into a half-wrinkled envelope like an afterthought. The return address? A shared office rental registered under Ethan Watts. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Imani. I was angry when I left. I've lost everything. The firm I tried to start, dead in the water. Investors pulled out. Clients ghosted. I know I messed up, but I wanted to say one thing. You were never just your mother's daughter. You were the storm we should have seen coming. Respectfully, Ethan. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Not for revenge. Not for triumph. For a reminder that people will always confuse kindness for softness until they run into the steel beneath. The next week, I was the keynote speaker at a leadership conference. I didn't wear black or navy or any of the expected colors. I wore red, cherry red, the exact color of the car they mocked. And when my cousins, the same ones who laughed at dinner that night, who posted pictures with captions like, "Real success is quiet," tried to reach out, I answered their group text with one sentence. Quiet success doesn't owe you a seat at its table. They didn't reply, because they knew. The girl they'd labeled the failure at the engagement dinner? She now ran one of the top-performing legacy firms on the East Coast. She didn't just walk away from their table. She built her own, with better lighting, stronger chairs, and no place cards with insults. And when my assistant came into my office that morning, asking if I still wanted the vintage car picked up for detailing, I smiled. Actually, leave it out front.
Top down.
Let them see it. I stepped outside, wind in my hair, sun warm on my shoulders. And as I turned the key in the ignition, a familiar voice echoed in my mind. Drive your own road, Imani, even if they laugh while you're paving it. I wasn't driving to prove anything anymore. I was driving because I could, because I built the road, because I earned the engine, because the only thing left behind was doubt. And that burned in the rearview. Final voiceover for cinematic ending. They tried to write her off, laugh her out, shame her into silence. But she didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply stood up and rewrote the ending.